I'm glad to be here to talk about access to affordable, high-quality childcare. Is absolutely an economic issue. It's vital to Ohio's families' participation in the workforce, especially women, and to our economy's recovery. A recent survey finds that more than 4 in 10 working families in Ohio had to cut back on work hours to care for their children. 60% of non-working or part-time working mothers would go back to work if they had access to quality and affordable childcare. Every child deserves quality early child care and learning experiences that set a strong foundation for everything that follows, including enhancing future learning opportunities, improving social and emotional development, and promoting lifelong success. Every parent deserves access to caring, affordable, and high-quality child care options for their children. They need this valuable assistance to provide economic stability for their families. This month, the Ohio Legislative Children's Caucus will hear from a business leader to explain the child care industry's strong ties to Ohio's workforce and economy, and state and national policy experts to help us learn about innovative ways Ohio can address these issues. We have 3 distinguished speakers today, and we'll start with Ms. Lois Rosenberry. Ms. Rosenberry founded and serves as president and CEO of Children's Discovery Center since 1982. She has extensive experience in early childhood development, has served as a college professor and a child care consultant for several private and public organizations. She's been awarded numerous recognitions for her distinguished career in the child care industry and serves on Ohio's Small Business Council and the board of the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. Ms. Rosenberry, we would like you to find out from you what have we learned since the pandemic about access to quality and affordable child care in our economy. And we'd also like, if you would, share with us your perspective as a business leader about the importance of supporting Ohio's child care infrastructure. Ms. Rosenberry.
Thank you, Senator Sykes, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak regarding Ohioans' access to quality and affordable child care from a business owner's perspective. I have been a provider for the past 40 years, and we currently have 6 locations in Northwest Ohio. I will focus my remarks on 3 key points: enrollment, workforce, and funding. Enrollment. Currently, Children's Discovery Center serves nearly 1,000 children, and we are operating at 88% capacity. We have a wait list of 175 children and have space to accommodate 110 more, if only we had the employees. By adding 110 children, we would increase our annual gross revenue by well over $1 million. So while I just quoted statistics from our business, I recognize that the issue is how families are impacted when their child can't enroll in early childhood programs. Let me give you a few examples. A Dayton couple was hired by 2 Toledo firms and was eagerly looking forward to moving into their new home. However, they learned that childcare was not available at our center. So they decided to work from home until we had space to accommodate their child. They promised to move when an opening occurred. Obviously, this impacts their new employers too, who unfortunately no longer have these 2 individuals to join their local workforce. Another parent called last week, very excited to tell us that she had a job. Even though her child had been on our wait list, we regretted to tell her we had no room. She said, "What am I going to do? I can't go to work without having care for my child. I don't have family who live nearby to help. I guess I will have to forego employment until you can accept my child." In preparation for today's presentation, I reached out to Wendy Gramza, who is the executive director of the Toledo Area Chamber of Commerce. She said she has heard numerous employers in our area state that women are not accepting employment because they cannot find childcare. Obviously, this void is definitely impacting many companies' bottom line. On another occasion, an investment banker told me he is looking to hire a well-qualified woman for a position in his firm. His hesitancy is that she has a 10-month-old and needs to work from home because childcare is not available. He questioned how she would be able to be an effective employee when her 10-month-old would be needing her attention. Perhaps some of you have seen the meme of the mother working from home on her computer with 2 children duct taped to the floor. When I first saw it, I burst out laughing. But then I sadly realized the truth that this photo conveyed. When parents can't find childcare and work from home, many times the child is either neglected and/or the quality and quantity of the parent's work suffers. From the child's perspective, I think of how many times that parent may be yelling, "Be quiet, I'm trying to work," or "Shut up, I'm on the phone." Perhaps you too have made business calls and heard children in the background, followed by an apology from the parent. More significantly are the years that these young children are losing by not being stimulated with age-appropriate activities that provide the foundation for learning and later success in life. At CDC, we utilize the Reggio Emilia educational model that views the child as strong and powerful, where he or she speaks with 100 languages. Without these foundational learning experiences, many of the children's languages are silenced. Workforce. This is the primary issue affecting all businesses, and it is certainly felt in the childcare industry. While we've had a few employees leave for jobs at Amazon, Jeep, and other venues, we have been fortunate to keep most of our staff. We've raised our starting wage to $15 an hour and subsequently increased wages for all of our employees. We offer health insurance and an attractive retirement plan. We advertise on Indeed and get many inquiries, but many fail to respond when we contact them or they don't show for the interview. Some work a few days and quit. Others simply prefer not to work. Fortunately, many of our employees have longevity and are willing to work overtime to keep our centers operating within ratio. Having college students work during the summer and winter breaks helps too. Now, if only we could get those 25 more, we could add that 110 to our wait list. Most on our wait list are infants and toddlers. As an aside, I do appreciate the new incentive that Ohio is offering to keep college graduates working in our state. Hopefully, this will help businesses at all levels to build their workforce. Finally, funding. Today's funding for PFCC is based on Step Up to Quality standards. Thanks to the members of the legislature, and I'm guessing many of you on this call, and Governor DeWine for assuring that these standards are maintained within this current budget. These standards promote learning and developmental programs which exceed basic health and safety guidelines. These are critical since childcare is one of the top barriers to parents returning to work, as I previously mentioned. But they are also foundational for both the workforce of today as well as the workforce of tomorrow. While the pandemic has caused many childcare centers to close, years of inadequate funding of PSCC programs have also been a critical factor. At CDC, we closed 2 centers where the enrollment was primarily PFCC children because state funding was not sufficient to support high quality care, and CDC is about high quality. We were receiving $40 less per week per child, yet we continued to grow, choosing instead to open 2 centers in a market where we were not dependent on state dollars. While we have seen some recent increases, the reimbursement rate is still less than private tuition. It is essential that reimbursement rates are comparable to the market rate for long-term sustainability. I'm going to repeat that sentence. It is essential that reimbursement rates are comparable to the market rate for long-term sustainability. But some recent funding decisions will definitely help in the short term. Ohio childcare providers, we would like to express our gratitude to our governor, legislators, and OCRA, and others who work to assure that the balance of the ARPA funding will be made available directly to providers, which will help us regain stability, hire and retain professional staff, and offer high quality care. As a board member of the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, we have set a goal of making Ohio one of the top 10 states in the country for business growth and development within the next 10 years. A well-educated workforce is the key to achieving that goal, and it starts with educating our young children through STEAM activities and a solid age-appropriate curriculum. There is nothing more gratifying than our students returning from college to thank us for the great start we gave them and to tell us about their new careers in financing, medicine, research, or fashion design. Thanks to each of you on this call for your willingness to tackle this subject of the impact of childcare on the Ohio economy. We all stand to benefit as a society when children are enrolled in a high-quality early education program, when working parents have access to affordable childcare, and when employers can increase their workforce. All these factors will not only help Ohio's economy to grow stronger, but will also make Ohio a great place for families to live and grow.
Ms. Rosenberry, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. Certainly informative, and I particularly was impressed with the illustration of the children being taped to the floor. That's very illustrative of the neglect that comes about of when parents don't have this assistance that they need, this quality childcare assistance. And I'd like to thank you for your service to the industry over the years and your presentation today. And we're going to have questions for you later on. The second presenter today is Ms. Chelsea Keaney. She's the Director of Communication and Stakeholder Engagement at Groundworks, where she supports the organization's mission and policy priorities through strategic communication, media relations, and engagement with diverse stakeholders. Chelsea holds nearly a decade of experience in nonprofit communications, policy research and advocacy, and issues campaign. Director, we'd like you to please provide with us an overview of your findings and key takeaways from the recent statewide poll and focus groups dealing with Ohio voters and parents with young children under 5. And if you also could give us some insights and overview on the ARPA dollars that the Ohio legislature recently allocated for childcare and how those dollars are going to be used.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Senator. And thank you to the Children's Caucus for the opportunity to speak with you all today on the important connection between our quality childcare system and Ohio's workforce. I think, Lois put in really clear terms about why this is such an important issue, not just for our workforce of today, but for our workforce of the future. So to get things started, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Groundwork Ohio, we are a statewide nonpartisan public policy research and advocacy organization that's dedicated to advancing policies that support the healthy development and early learning of Ohio's youngest children. So really focusing on that prenatal period to age 5, when we know that children's brains are developing at their quickest, and that we have a real opportunity to lay a strong foundation for our families and our communities. For next slide, please. So to set sort of the context of how we came about developing this survey. So throughout the course of the pandemic, of course, we've heard more and more economists and business leaders identify the childcare crisis as a major barrier that's keeping parents and in particular women out of the workforce. And I'm sure, for anyone who is either a caregiver to a young child right now or knows somebody who's caring for a young child right now, chances are you've heard how challenging and exhausting these past 2 years have been for working parents. So at Groundwork Ohio, we thought it was really important to get a better understanding of what parents in Ohio with young children are currently experiencing. I think Lois put in, shared some really compelling anecdotes of, we've all heard stories of families who have either had to turn down a job, turn down a promotion because they didn't have access to childcare. So we really wanted to get a better sense of, what is the picture statewide in Ohio? And so we commissioned a statewide poll with Public Opinion Strategies, which is one of the nation's leading Republican polling firms, to really dig deeper into understanding what parents are up against right now. So our poll, it was conducted October 26th through November 8th, and we released it in December of last year. And it included 800 registered voters throughout the state. But to really get a better sense of what was going on with those parents with children under the age of 5, we did an oversample of parents with kids under the age of 5. Next slide, please. And so, to give you a better sense of who these parents are that we're talking about as I'm sharing this data with you, you'll see on your screen a demographic profile of the parents that we interviewed as part of this survey. So throughout the rest of this presentation, any mention to parents is dealing specifically with these parents in Ohio with kids under the age of 5. Next slide. So as you may imagine, our poll covered a lot of really compelling issues, but for the sake of time today, I'm really going to focus in on what we found were the key takeaways, particularly in connection with challenges with childcare and Ohio's workforce. So, unsurprisingly, when we spoke to Ohio voters on the whole, they said that, getting the COVID-19 pandemic under control and getting Ohioans back to work are the most important issues that our state is facing right now. And this was followed by issues on controlling the cost of healthcare and the quality of our public education here in Ohio. Next slide. However, when you ask Ohio parents with children under the age of 5 what they think are the most important issues right now, they said that improving the quality of public education and making sure that our children get a strong start through quality early childhood education programs are the most important issues. And I think this really exemplifies that, when it comes to parents with young children, quality education, including early education, are really top of mind for our parents with young kids. Next slide. So additionally, and I think this is one of the clearest and strongest takeaways that came from our survey, and I have a couple slides that are covering this, but we really found that access to quality, affordable childcare is an economic issue, not just during the pandemic, but prior to the pandemic and moving forward. This really is an issue of workforce development and economic growth for our state. So in our survey, nearly half of Ohio parents with children under the age of 5 said that in recent months, they have had serious problems with childcare, meeting work and family responsibilities, or affording childcare, all of which have impacted their work in some way. We also know that this childcare crisis, it's really had an outsized impact on women, particularly mothers with young children. And that, during the pandemic, women's workforce participation has plummeted. It's at its lowest rate in the past 3 decades. And so I think it's of no surprise to anyone when we talk to moms in Ohio with young children who are either working part-time or not working, 60% of them said that they would either return to the workforce or they would work more hours if they had access to quality, affordable childcare. So again, this crisis is really hurting families and keeping women in particular out of the workforce or working, to the full extent that they would like to be. And then finally, as you see here, 43% of working parents with children under the age of 5 in Ohio said that in recent months, they have had to cut back on work hours to care for their children. So I think, these 3 statistics together really show just how disruptive childcare challenges can be, not just to working parents, but also to the businesses that really rely on them to show up each day. Next slide. So we also asked parents an open-ended question. And so this was presented to parents both who identified that they had childcare and those who identified as not having access to childcare. And we asked them, what does childcare either enable you to do or would enable you to do that you otherwise weren't able to do? And the most common overwhelming response that we got across the board was work more. So, in other words, parents who have childcare said that it enables them to work more, and parents who don't have childcare said, if I had childcare, it would enable me to work more. I think really for us, what this spoke to us is that parents with young children really do see the direct connection between access to quality childcare and their ability to go to work. Next slide, please. All right. We also found that Ohio voters and parents as well, they recognize that childcare is expensive. And that is, of course, one of the barriers when we talk about accessing quality childcare. It is the expense of it. So 80% of Ohio voters said that childcare is expensive where they live. I've also included a chart here from Childcare Aware to really, if anyone's not familiar with the cost of childcare in Ohio, just to give you a better sense of what it costs a family today. So for the average Ohio family with 2 young children, we're talking about an infant and a 4-year-old, the cost of childcare can surpass up to $18,000 a year. So when we're talking about, either single family households or even 2-parent households, $18,000 is a significant expense for families to have to pay in order to secure the childcare that they need to go to work. Next slide. So additionally, and I think this is important, talking not just about, the economic reality when it comes to childcare, but also just the significant amount of stress families are already facing as a result of the pandemic. So, we asked some questions related to how families are dealing with the pandemic. And one of the key findings that we found from this survey is that the pandemic has really been a tipping point for families. And I would say, obviously our survey was conducted before this most recent variant, which has really disrupted and upended a lot of families once again. And so I would say if the pandemic of the last 2 years has been a tipping point, then, the Omicron variant of the past month has really been a breaking point, especially for parents with children under the age of 5 who aren't in school and aren't able to get vaccinated. So when we talk to parents, 86% of Ohio parents with children under the age of 5 said that they have experienced stress from the pandemic, including more than a third of these parents who said it has caused a lot of stress for them and their families. 87% of Ohio voters said that they believe that the pandemic has put a strain on kids' mental health and the mental health of our parents throughout the state. And nearly 7 in 10 Ohio parents with children under the age of 5 said that they are worried about the mental or emotional health of their children. Next slide, please. So another key takeaway from the poll that we conducted is that, an overwhelming majority of Ohioans, including an overwhelming majority of Ohio parents with kids under the age of 5, really believe that early learning is the most important part or educational experience of a young child's life. Our survey shows that voters and parents each recognize that the state's education budget should allocate more towards early childhood education. So in our survey, we posed a hypothetical question to parents and we said, imagine you have $100 to invest in an education in the state. And we broke that down into 4 stages. The first of which was early childhood education, which we define as ages 0 to 5, grade school, which we identified as kindergarten through 5th grade, junior high and middle school, which was 6th through 8th grade, and then high school, which 9th through 12th grade. So again, you have $100 to invest across these 4 educational stages of a child's life. Where do you want to see that money go? Ohio voters said that they would like to see nearly a quarter of that money, that $100, go towards early childhood education, so 24.2%. Meanwhile, parents with children under the age of 5, unsurprisingly, they said more than 30%, 31.4% of the state's education funding should be devoted specifically to early childhood education, so ages 0 to 5. Even strong Republicans said that they would like to see nearly a quarter of the state's education funding devoted to early childhood education. So again, I think on the whole, parents, voters of all political stripes, they see this as really an important period of a child's development and educational journey, and that funding should match that experience as well. Next slide, please. Finally, our poll shows that this is an issue that really activates Ohio voters, especially parents with young children. 79% of Ohio voters, including 71% of Republicans, 73% of independents, and 93% of Democrats, said that early childhood education would be the top factor of their vote for an elected official. Nearly 90% of parents with children under the age of 5 said that it would be their top factor. It's also an issue that motivates parents into action. So nearly 9 out of 10, 88% of Ohio parents with children under the age of 5 said that they would be willing to write or call their representatives to express their support for this issue. Next slide. So I know I presented a lot of numbers and percentages to you all today, but I think if I were to say that there was one key takeaway from this survey, it's that childcare is an economic issue, and parents with young children are really facing incredible pressure right now that's affecting not just at home, but at work. Parents with young children, especially mothers, they're telling us that they want and they need childcare in order to go back to work. So if we want to solve Ohio's workforce challenges, not just today, but in the future, we really need to listen to what parents are telling us and make sure that, we have a strong quality early learning system and childcare system in place for families and children. Next slide. So before we move on to the next presenter, I was asked to provide a brief update on the American Rescue Plan Act and the dollars that were allocated specifically for childcare here in Ohio. So late last year, through the controlling board and the passage of House Bill 169, Ohio appropriated more than $700 million non-discretionary dollars from ARPA. This is funding that Ohio receives specifically to help stabilize the childcare industry. Both the allocations from the controlling board and House Bill 169, the funding is directed for the same purpose, to assist childcare providers with the pandemic recovery and help them stabilize. So you'll see here that there are subgrants that are categorized into different buckets. I'll provide a brief overview of each of these. I'm happy to follow up if anybody is interested in learning more about each of these specifically to give you more information. But one of which is operating a new pandemic cost subgrants. So these are subgrants that can be used to assist providers with ongoing costs such as rent, utilities, and insurance, as well as for new costs that are associated with the pandemic, such as covering PPE. The next bucket is workforce recruitment and retention subgrants. So these are really targeted to support the early education workforce through putting them towards wages, sign-on and retention bonuses, and other items to increase staffing and reduce turnover within different childcare programs. There's also access development subgrants. So these are funds that can be used to expand the number of current classrooms, as well as to reopen classrooms that might have been closed during the pandemic. And this subgrant can also be applied to increase technology access, support programs that serve school-age children, and expand therapeutic childcare programs to provide ongoing mental health services to children and staff. As I mentioned earlier, one of our findings from the poll was that parents are concerned about the mental health and emotional health of their children. And so making sure that we're providing services that are responsive to the needs of both children and providers. There was also funding allocated towards administrative infrastructure support. And so that is being used to create online grant applications and to establish mobile compatibility to support with technical assistance. And finally, mental health workforce and family support subgrants. This is funding that can be used to support costs related to mental health and well-being of children and employees. And with that, I look forward to answering your questions, and I will turn things over back to Senator Sykes to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Director. Groundworks has become such a very important policy research and advocacy organization in this area here in the state of Ohio. We certainly appreciate all the work that you and your organization is doing for young children in Ohio, and particularly the poll and focus groups, which gives us the perspectives of the families, which are real important for us to understand where they're coming from. But I'm sure we'll have some additional questions later. The next presenter is Jennifer Palmer, early childhood senior policy specialist with the National Conference of State Legislators. As a senior policy specialist focusing on early childhood policies, Jennifer Palmer's expertise is in child care in the early care and education workforce. Prior to joining the National Conference of State Legislators, Ms. Palmer worked in political communications in the Iowa House of Representatives. Now, we'd really like to hear about how the states, other states, use the federal dollars to support child care industry and families' access to quality, affordable childcare. As well, if you could help us identify some concrete examples of how legislatures in particular have been innovative. Ms. Palmer.
Thank you for that, Senator Sykes. It's an honor to be here today to share some of our tracking with you around spending on childcare through the American Rescue Plan. It might not surprise you to know that of all the policies we track here in the early childhood team at NCSL, which includes pre-kindergarten, home visiting, paid family leave, early childhood mental health, and so on. Childcare tends to be the most legislated of all of those. So just last year in our tracking, childcare was nearly half of all the bills we followed, about 92 out of around 200. We also tracked another 31 related to the early care and education workforce. So it keeps us very busy and it gets a little bit tricky. And I'm sure you have some experience, the legislators and legislative staff on the line know that this gets tricky because it's not always done through legislation, especially these stimulus packages that were considered unanticipated federal funds most often in most states did not go through the legislature. So this continues to be a difficult topic to track and an evolving issue. So let me dive in. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Just tell you first where I'm coming from. I'm here in the Denver office of the National Conference of State Legislatures, where we support all 7,383 legislators and the 25,000 plus legislative staff across the country. We cover all policy issues, more than 1,400, including early childhood, child care, and the early care and education workforce. We also serve as a state voice in DC, where we advocate on behalf of states' rights. But a big part of what I do here at NCSL is work on these connections, the training, the meetings, the gatherings of legislators and legislative staff to help them learn from one another and experts in the field. And I've been asked to briefly mention one of those gatherings that is coming up, and that is our Early Childhood Fellows Program. This will be our 10th year offering the Fellows Program. You can go ahead and move to the next slide. And in the Fellows Program, I see my text might not be showing up, but that's okay. There we go, thank you. The Fellows Program, we sort of learn all the ins and outs of early childhood. It is a program geared towards legislators or legislative staff who are serving in human services or education, maybe appropriations related committees, and they learn sort of all the policy options, the funding mechanisms, what the research shows. It's an opportunity to learn from one another, as well as I stated, the experts in the field. We have alumni, go ahead to the next slide, please. We have alumni from almost all 50 states, just missing North Dakota and Virginia there, as well as DC and Puerto Rico. After you've completed the Fellows Program, you are part of this 200 plus group of alumni who then have access to some exclusive early childhood programming and ongoing learning opportunities. As I said, next slide, please. We're about to kick off our 10th cohort, and so I wanted to share the timeline that this program follows. Participation first requires nomination by leadership in your chamber, as well as an application. NCSL then reviews those applications, and we pick a cohort of about 25 to 30 legislators or legislative staff to find a diverse makeup geographically and politically. I know Senator Sykes as well as Senator Kunze have participated in the past. If you have questions, please reach out to them or to myself. We will begin this summer. We'll have 2 in-person meetings, hopefully 2 virtual learning opportunities as well, where, as I said, you learn sort of all the ins and outs of early childhood policy. This is also the timeline for 2 new fellows programs we'll be offering on child maltreatment prevention, as well as youth and young adult homelessness. And our health colleagues here at NCSL also offer 2 fellows programs on maternal and child health, as well as opioid policies. So if those are of interest to you, please reach out. I'll have my contact information at the end, and I'd be happy to provide you more information. So back to childcare. Thanks for indulging me there for just a moment. I'll start by just sharing this timeline of the 3 stimulus packages over the last 2 years that provided more than $50 billion in childcare funds. Just to note that we are coming up on some of the deadlines to obligate these funds. So you see there in the 2022 column. But also want to point out that the ARPA funds don't have to be, the discretionary funds, that is, don't have to be obligated until 2023. So states still have time, and we anticipate a lot of movement on this legislative session. And lastly, wanted to lay these out to sort of show you that when we are trying to track what states are doing and what programs and policies are being funded, it can sometimes be hard to tell where the CARES and CRSA dollars end and the ARPA dollars begin. So just to show you that this is a moving target. I'm going to focus primarily on the $39 billion specifically for childcare here, but wanted to mention the state fiscal recovery funds as well. That was another bucket within ARPA funds, because we have seen a few states who are tapping into those dollars for childcare as well. The stabilization grants, you probably already know, were pretty prescriptive in the way that they could be used. About 90% had to go directly to providers, so I won't spend very much time there. I'll spend most of my time here on this $15 billion in the supplemental discretionary funds. Now, the guidance put forth by the Office of Child Care on how to spend these funds began by cautioning states from beginning with just expanding childcare, just getting subsidies into the hands of more families, but to really encourage them to think about how to support the existing system and the existing professionals in the field. So I'm going to start with the early care and education workforce as well. This guidance also encouraged prioritizing expanding care for underserved areas and underserved populations. And one way to do that is through grants and contracts. So subsidized care for an underserved population might include infants and toddlers, like we're seeing in Nevada, they're using their ARPA funds there to create a contract program for infant and toddler care. It might also be for children with disabilities, children in foster care, as we're seeing in other states. Another option, or suggestion rather, recommendation from the Office of Child Care was to focus on reimbursement policies, reimbursement for those providers who provide subsidized care. This includes raising rates, paying based on enrollment, which we're seeing in both Georgia and Michigan, increasing those tiered reimbursement rates. We've seen that in a lot of places. I'll just give you a few examples. In Tennessee, for example, they are increasing reimbursement rates by 10% across all program types, along with additional increases for programs who serve children with disabilities. Again, that focus on underserved children and families. Michigan is increasing provider reimbursement rates by 30% through the end of last year. We'll see if that continues this year. Minnesota plans to raise reimbursement rates from the 25th percentile to the 40th percentile for infants and toddlers, and the 30th percentile for preschool and school age programs. Pennsylvania is moving its reimbursement rates from the 40th to the 60th percentile. So again, you can sort of see why rates being as low as they have been historically, why the Office of Child Care was placing that focus on really addressing those issues before addressing expansion. We're also seeing states begin to explore how new ways to address setting their reimbursement rates. So moving away potentially from the market survey to the cost of care or cost of quality study. There's a study right now in Vermont underway examining that possibility, and we know it's in place in both New Mexico and Washington, D.C. A few other ways you see listed: compensation. This in most states like Iowa and Idaho involves wage supplements, wage bonuses, getting the money directly into the hands of childcare providers. In North Carolina, they've actually taken another tack where they are focusing on bringing their state-funded pre-K teachers into closer parity with their K-12 teachers. Other examples: shared services, business startup costs. These are all ways to help bring new businesses on and to support existing providers. And of course, the stabilization grants, as I mentioned before, a lot is to keep existing providers. A lot of the efforts that we've seen are to keep existing providers continuing to offer services, but there are a few states that had an interesting approach to this by adding an equity adjustment to their stabilization grant applications. And that is, starting with a base layer, they would make adjustments not just for underserved populations, as I mentioned, maybe infants and toddlers or children in foster care, but also using the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index. So getting more money into the providers who are serving more at-risk, more high-needs populations. Those states included Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Louisiana. Moving on to assistance to families. I'll speed up here a little bit. We saw lots of states expanding their eligibility to more families by addressing both what qualifies as eligible activities to qualify for subsidies, as well as income thresholds. The most, what's the word I want to say? The most ambitious of these was New Mexico, in which they expanded their eligibility from 200% of the federal poverty level to 350% of the federal poverty level, making it the state with the highest income eligibility for childcare assistance. Again, expanding eligibility, expanding the window of time that families are eligible, and then reducing or eliminating copays. We saw several states, I'm going to say almost half, covering copays last year during 2021, and there were at least 9 that are planning to continue that into this next year. Go ahead and move forward, please. Lastly, technology and facilities. States are using these ARPA dollars to improve technology systems for providers and for families, making it easier for them to find care, helping providers and business owners be able to access supports, be able to talk to one another, potentially create these shared services models that I touched on earlier, and also integrating existing systems like a licensing system, a childcare assistance platform, helping those systems to talk to one another. Of course, expansion of facilities, improvement of facilities is going to be an issue almost everywhere. And so we've seen states prioritize some of their ARPA funds to help get more room in order to serve more families. There's just 2 more state examples on the next 2 slides. I won't read through all of them, but just wanted to give you an example of a state like Georgia, where they are considering both how to serve families better, or meet more families rather, by expanding eligibility, as well as how to get more money into the hands of providers who are doing this work, including through these bonuses, through addressing their reimbursement policies. Lastly, Kentucky is the next one, and they are really, you're seeing prioritize the business part of childcare. So helping state or providers tap into those startup funds, prioritizing apprenticeship program, again, with facilities and technology. And they are also tapping into the pilots option with the contracts to preserve spaces for infants and toddlers within subsidized care. Apologize if I went way over there. I just, as I said, have lots to share. There will be some links here that you can tap into when they've released the slides. I realize I only talked about early childhood childcare. We also cover school-aged care, so make sure you have some resources for that as well. And I will stop there.
Oh, Ms. Palmer, thank you so much. I really appreciated the opportunity I had to participate in the Early Childhood Fellows Program, particularly the ideas we got about innovative programs and initiatives from other states. I think was very, very helpful. And I will stand, I'm sure, Senator Kunze as well, to answer any questions that any of our state colleagues might have on joining the program. So thank you so much for your presentation. I'm sure we'll have some questions during the question and answer session. I turn it over to you, Senator Kunze.
Thank you so much, Senator Sykes. I appreciate that. And I want to echo your comments. Jennifer, it's been a pleasure. NCSL does a great job, I think, really being an advocate and also an educator for us as we look across what other states are doing across the nation. So we're grateful for your support and for being here today. Thank you for being here today. And thank you to all of our panelists. We've had a great presentation. I'm going to open it up to see if any of our other legislators who are on the call, you can unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question. Okay, I don't see anybody jumping yet from our legislators. I do see a question to the host and panelists in the chat from Representative Russo's legislative aide. It says, Jennifer, do we have the data on how these changes on the state level have affected the ability of childcare centers to stay open or open new childcare centers? And do we have any numbers on how this has affected the job market and parents' working hours? So Jennifer, I don't know if you have the data on that, but I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, good question. I think because this is all just still evolving, it's a little bit early for that, but I would guess that there are groups like Groundwork Ohio in other states, the advocates who are really keeping an eye on this and tracking how the dollars are spent and then the outcomes through surveys, just as you did, things like that. So I don't know of one off the top of my head to share with you. I'd be happy to look. I know Child Care Aware, which is a national, advocacy organization, is certainly probably collecting some information on this. So I think it's a little bit early, but also there are certainly people who are keeping an eye on this in the advocacy space.
Yes, I think we will start to see as probably this, you said the obligated, some of the obligated dollars are actually hitting in 2022. And so it's probably, like you said, a little bit early to see what some of the results are going to be, but it's a great question, something that we'll be looking forward to seeing, just the results of this influx of money and how different states have used it and what really works, what's best practice. Hopefully we'll get some really good data from all of this across the board. Next, I'm going to ask if any other legislators want to jump in with a question. I think there's a question in our Q&A, so I'll go to that. It says, this is all great information. Love the polling data from Groundwork. It was frustrating to see Republican states and localities turning back money to the feds because they see a low unemployment and so many jobs available. They don't want to send ARPA dollars, but I don't think they are taking this child care aspect into account. Would you agree? And how do we change behavior and help families get access or assistance, in this area? I think, one of the things, I'll open this up to the panel if anybody wants to comment about what you're seeing maybe across the states or in other areas. But, we did see at the end of Groundwork's presentation, the $700 million of ARPA Ohio is investing. We aren't sending any money back, but I don't know if any of the panelists want to comment on that question.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I'll just jump in and, as you mentioned, Ohio did take advantage and leverage these funds, which I think is obviously was very welcome, not just from the Groundwork Ohio team, but also from providers and child care programs across the state. These were one-time dollars to help stabilize the system that, of course, was urgently needed. I mentioned a lot of the polling data we had is specific to sort of the crisis situation that many families are facing right now. But I think it's also really important to acknowledge, and, Lois, I think touched on this in her remarks as well, but, it's our providers are in crisis as well. So making sure that, they receive these funds to help stabilize and make sure that their programs can remain open, I think is really critical. It's a critical first step in addressing these challenges. But of course, there are ongoing conversations about, where do we go from here, seeing as these are one-time dollars, how do we make sure that we're building a sustainable quality childcare system that meets the needs of providers, families, and children.
Yes, I agree. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to add to that. There is another question in the chat. That question is for Jennifer. It says, can you talk about examples of communities leveraging public schools to provide full-time, high-quality childcare options for families?
I'm thinking of a really good example out of Nebraska that I cannot think of the name of right now. And so I'd love to get you some information on this. It's just not coming to the top of my mind. But we certainly heard a lot about this last year, when schools were closed and using existing buildings and space for childcare. But as far as ongoing ones, childcare, assuming you mean somewhere between birth to 3 and not just pre-K that we typically, we sometimes see in public school buildings. Let me get back to you on that, and I will follow up with some examples.
Great, thank you. Any other legislators that want to unmute and ask any questions?
I've got a question.
Yes, please, Senator.
I'm trying to figure out if any other states are being challenged with the distinction between just child care or quality early childhood education. In the polling, is there a distinction? Is the demand for child care, or is it also for early childhood education? Are other states and the assistance that they're providing, are they just providing it to daycare centers, or is this is it a priority placed on the quality of the educational opportunities in those centers?
Yeah, so I can jump in on that question and certainly welcome our panelists as well. But, I would say that from our focus groups and the polling specifically, so, before we developed the poll that went out statewide, we did host some focus groups to talk to parents to just get a little bit deeper on these issues. And I think really the issue of quality did come through strong. These are parents who they take a lot of stock and value in the quality of the environment of where their children are during the day. They want to know that their children are in a nurturing environment. And I think that was true before the pandemic, but I think it's especially true now when we consider, the potential mental and emotional health tolls that the pandemic has taken on young children. We know that especially when we're looking at our infants and toddlers, 80% of brain development happens in the first 3 years of life. And so, we're about year 3 of this pandemic. So for some of these children, this is all they've known. And there have been significant stresses and points of adversity for many Ohio families throughout the state. So I think now more than ever, conversations around the importance of quality are even more important, because we need to make sure that these children are in environments that are really nurturing and addressing some of the challenges that they and their families have been facing. And, I think to Lois's point early on, that this isn't, we talked a lot about the workforce of today and how making sure that there is access to quality and affordable childcare is really important to the workforce of today. But really, it's also building our workforce of tomorrow. So our children and our grandchildren, we know when they are in quality early learning settings that they are more prepared for kindergarten, which of course is one of the biggest predictors in how they perform, not just throughout their academic careers and their post-secondary attainment, but also how they do in their careers and in life. So, I think it's not just a conversation of our workforce today, but really an investment into the workforce of the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was actually sitting here while you were going through from Ms. Rosenberry's to your presentation to NCSL, thinking, we kind of started with the business climate, the workforce impact. I serve on the Governor's Workforce Transformation Board. We've been talking a lot about, how do we upscale, increase certificates, make sure people have access to that training. We hear in those meetings that childcare is an issue for people, even, to go back to school to get a certificate or a 2-year program, let alone if you're going to a 4-year degree program. And so I also last year chaired the Children's Trust Fund Board, which is tasked with prevention of child abuse in our state. And I was thinking about, just the impacts of trauma that we've seen, historically in that, as a member of that board. And then what is this going to look like as far as just so much trauma? Are there increases with ACEs that we're going to see? And to your point about young children, who some of them are growing up, their brains are developing, and it's been entirely in a pandemic world. And so I think those are going to be some significant things that we're going to face as policymakers. And then, in your polling as well, just the amount of parents, when we're listening to Ohio's families, which is what you did, thankfully, and appreciate the data that you collected, because really, some of the things that stood out to me in that data was just the stress on parents, the stress on children, mental health, social emotional health of children, all of those things, even outside of the workforce question that we are trying to grapple with, or the child care question. So appreciate all of that, thinking from early childhood all the way up, to, as you pointed out, to a contributing member of our state and our economy, to being a successful, healthy adult. Like, these are all, they're not siloed, they're all interconnected. So I think there's another question in the Q&A. This is more of a general question, and I apologize if I missed the answer. The person writes, are there national or statewide estimates for lost revenue as a result of inaccess to child care? By that same vein, are there estimates to proposed increased revenue as a result of increasing access to child care? I don't know which one of you want to try to.
So I'm happy to answer that question, but I did see, I think Lois had a comment from the last question. If Lois would like to jump in real quick, and then I can address this question.
Thank
No,
you.
As I was thinking about these ARPA funds, I sat down this morning and I thought, how can we use those as a business to really impact the quality of early childhood for our state? And so as a team, we sat down and we said, we'd like to use these funds to invest in continuing education for our employees. We want them to get degrees. We want them to be educators with a 2 or a 4-year degree. We also, when we offer, healthcare benefits, they still have to contribute, more money than we'd like them to. These funds will allow us to contribute more so that our employees will have more money at the end. And of course, we want to do staff retention and new employee bonuses. And I think it's important for you as legislators to understand that when you give us these funds, that we are investing them and we're very intentional about how we can make our childcare in our state of Ohio better for all our families.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So yes, in regards to the question on national and statewide estimates, I'm going to look at my notes here so I know I'm citing this correctly. So even before the pandemic, we know that childcare challenges, so lack of access, childcare disruptions, it was costing working parents $37 billion a year in lost income. So again, this is before the pandemic. And employers were losing an estimated $13 billion a year in lost productivity. For Ohio specifically, that translates to about $1.7 billion per year of economic losses due to childcare issues. As far as the question about, the benefits of investing. So Groundwork Ohio commissioned a study with the University of Cincinnati Economic Center last spring to really look at, what do we get for the public dollars that are invested specifically in publicly funded childcare, so our quality childcare system here in Ohio. And that study showed that public investment generates a 10% return on public investment each year. So that's an annual 10% return on investment. And that's through, educational benefits, cost savings on things such as like healthcare, education, even reduction in involvement in the juvenile justice system, as well as long-term benefits in terms of educational attainment and workforce productivity and lifetime earnings as we look sort of the lifespan of the child as they go out into their careers. So both, I think that those numbers, pretty big price tags, both in terms of what we lose when we don't invest, but also, what we stand to gain when we do.
Are there any additional questions? I know we're getting close to 3 o'clock.
Senator Sykes, I wonder if we lost Senator Coonsey and
Senator Coonsey. I
Sorry,
think we may have.
I'm
Hello?
having technical difficulties. Can you hear me? I just
We can hear
anyway,
you. There you
I'm
go.
sorry. There we go. I hit something. I don't know if there are any additional questions in the chat. I was actually trying to kick it back to you to see while I was trying to struggle to find the chat. It says there is another question about where we are allocating the money from the $15 billion pot. Do we know how those will be allocated in Ohio? I don't know if Groundwork has breakdown of some of that I'm not sure which $15 billion pot. We can probably get that information though and put it out to members of the Children's Caucus.
Yes, I was going to say, I don't have those specifics in front of me, but that's something our team can certainly pull together.
Okay, great. We'll make sure we get that to Allison to distribute to the members.
And some of it was through the legislature and some through the controlling board. So we'd have to a couple of different locations to identify.
Yes, thanks for your service on controlling board as well. Well, I think we are coming up on 3 o'clock. I want to thank all of our panelists today, Ms. Rosenberry, Chelsea from Groundwork Ohio, obviously, and Jennifer, thanks for being here from NCSL. The Chamber and Groundwork and NCSL are all wonderful partners, not only with us, but also with the entire administration, the state. We rely on your expertise, and we're grateful for the advocacy that you have provided today and the information. Thanks to the legislators that joined us, as well as the participants from across the state. We definitely recognize that we have a lot of work to do in this area, and we're really grateful to hear some of your ideas, your feedback. Again, we really want to listen to Ohio's families and try to meet the needs of, especially the unique needs. We knew this was broken before the pandemic, and obviously we are seeing just a lot of across the board similar needs that we had before the pandemic, but then exacerbated since then. And we really are grateful for the advocacy that all of you do on a daily basis. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody stay safe.